Jake Morrison stood in the massive chamber and felt his heart sink. The alien beings around him looked down from their high seats like judges deciding his fate. Their strange faces showed no emotion, but he could feel their disgust. They had made up their minds before he even walked into the room. The speaker was a tall creature with skin like crystal. Her voice rang out cold and clear across the huge space. We have talked about this problem for many years. The humans are too dangerous. They fight too much. They cannot control their anger. We do not want them in our galaxy anymore. Jake tried to stay calm. He had known this day might come. For 50 years, humans had been part of the Galactic Council. They had tried to fit in with the other species. They had followed the rules and kept the peace. But it was never enough. "Please," Jake said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Give us another chance. We can change. We can be better." The crystal being shook her head. "No. We have seen what humans do when they are angry. We have seen your wars. We have seen how you destroy your own planet. We cannot risk having you destroy ours too." Other aliens nodded their agreement. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had too many eyes or mouths in strange places. They all looked different, but they all agreed on one thing. Humans had to go. "You have 1 year," the speaker continued. 1 year to pack your things and leave our space. After that, any human found in Council territory will be arrested. Jake felt the words hit him like a punch to the stomach. 1 year to move billions of people. 1 year to abandon everything they had built. 1 year to find somewhere else to go in a galaxy that did not want them. He walked out of the chamber with his head held high, but inside he was breaking apart. How do you tell an entire species that they are not welcome anywhere? Captain Lisa Bennett was waiting for him on the ship. She could see the bad news on his face before he said a word. "They said no, didn't they?" Jake nodded. "Worse. They want you's gone. All of us. We have 1 year." Lisa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had been a soldier for 20 years. She had fought in wars and survived battles that killed thousands. But this felt different. This felt like the end of everything. "I'll send the message," she said quietly. Within hours, every human colony got the news. Every space station, every mining ship, every research post scattered across the galaxy received the same emergency broadcast. The message was simple and terrible. Pack what you can carry. Leave everything else behind. Head for the edge of the galaxy. Dr. Kevin Walsh read the message 3 times before it sank in. He was in charge of New Portland, a colony world with 2 million people. They had farms and factories, schools and hospitals. They had built a whole civilization on this planet. Now they had to leave it all behind. He walked outside and looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, painting the clouds orange and pink. Children were playing in the park nearby, laughing and running around without a care in the world. Tomorrow, he would have to tell them they were going to lose their home. The next few months were chaos. Transport ships arrived from Earth to help move people and supplies. Families had to choose what to keep and what to leave behind. Photo albums and family pets made the cut. Furniture and cars did not. On the day the last ship left New Portland, Kevin stood in the empty streets of the city he had helped build. The houses were still there, but they felt dead without people inside them. The aliens would probably tear it all down and build something new. They would erase every trace that humans had ever lived here. As his ship lifted off, Kevin watched the planet get smaller and smaller through the window. He had spent 15 years of his life on that world. Now it was just another dot of light in the darkness. Admiral Patricia Hayes commanded the largest fleet in human history. Thousands of ships stretched out in every direction, carrying everyone who had ever lived beyond Earth Some ships were huge passenger liners that could hold 1,000,000 people. Others were tiny cargo haulers, packed with supplies. All of them were heading for the same place, the empty space between galaxies. She opened a communication channel to the Galactic Council one last time. Her voice was calm and steady, but her words carried a warning that would echo through history. You wanted us gone. You have your wish. But remember this day. Remember that you threw away the only species that would have stood beside you when the darkness comes. You may regret this choice sooner than you think. The transmission ended. The human fleet jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared into the void. Behind them, the galaxy continued to spin, a little emptier and a lot less interesting than it had been before. The aliens thought they had solved their human problem. They had no idea what they had just unleashed upon the universe. 50 years had passed since the great ships left the galaxy behind. Admiral Ryan Clark floated in his command center, looking out at the endless black space around them. He was the grandson of one of the original fleet commanders, born during the long journey to nowhere. The human fleet had grown larger over the decades. New ships were built from scrapped materials and asteroid mining. What started as thousands of vessels had become millions. But they were still lost between the stars, drifting through empty space with no real destination. Ryan checked the daily reports on his tablet. Food production was down again. The recycling systems were breaking more often. People were getting sick from breathing the same air for too long. Worst of all, hope was dying. The older generation still remembered planets and blue skies. The younger ones only knew metal walls and artificial light dot in the farming section of the massive ship called New Earth. Michelle Carter wiped sweat from her face as she worked. The cargo holds had been turned into giant gardens decades ago. Rows and rows of vegetables grew under bright lights. But it was never enough food for everyone. Michelle had invented new ways to grow plants using less water and soil. She had figured out how to make fertilizer from human waste and dead plants. Her work kept 12 billion people alive, but just barely. Every day was a struggle to produce enough calories to feed the hungry mouths on the ships. We need more space, she told her assistant as they harvested tomatoes. The population keeps growing, but we can't build gardens fast enough. Her assistant nodded tiredly. Everyone was tired these days. When you live your whole life in a metal box floating through space, exhaustion becomes normal. Timothy Hudson had never seen a real planet. He was 25 years old and had spent every day of his life on the generation ship Freedom. His parents told him stories about grass and trees and animals, but to him they sounded like fairy tales. Tim was part of a group called the Voidborn. They were the children and grandchildren of the original refugees, people who grew up in space and knew nothing else. They were different from their parents in ways that worried the older generation. The Voidborn didn't dream about planets. They didn't miss the feeling of wind or rain. They had adapted to life in the ships so completely that they seemed like a different kind of human. They were pale from lack of sunlight, thin from low gravity, and quiet in a way that made their elders uncomfortable. But they were also incredibly focused. While their parents argued about the old days and worried about the future, the Voidborn worked on practical things. They fixed broken machines with amazing skill. They designed better systems for the ships. They seemed to understand technology in ways that surprised everyone. Captain Nicole Foster commanded a small scout ship that flew ahead of the main fleet. Her job was to search for anything useful in the empty space around them. Planets, asteroids, abandoned alien ships, anything that might help the fleet survive. Day after day, her sensors showed the same thing. Nothing. Empty space stretched in every direction, cold and dark and lifeless. Sometimes she found chunks of rock or ice that could be mined for materials. But mostly she found emptiness. Nicole had been doing this job for 15 years. She had explored hundreds of star systems and found nothing worth settling on. Dead worlds, poisonous atmospheres, radiation that would kill anyone who got too close. The space between galaxies was truly empty. She was about to turn back from another useless system when her sensors picked up something strange. It was big, much bigger than any ship or asteroid, and it was artificial. Commander Danny Rodriguez got the call while he was sleeping. Nicole's voice crackled over the radio, full of excitement for the first time in years. "Danny, you need to see this. I found something. Something impossible." Danny had led dozens of exploration missions over the years. Usually they found nothing interesting. Old space junk, dead satellites, sometimes the wreck of an alien ship that had been stripped clean long ago. But Nicole sounded different this time. He gathered his team and flew out to meet her. When he saw what she had found, his mouth fell open in shock. It was a ring. A massive ring of black metal floating in space, so big that Earth could have fit through the center with room to spare. It was clearly artificial, built by someone with technology far beyond anything humans had ever seen. But the strangest thing was how old it looked. The metal was covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Strange symbols were carved into the surface, glowing faintly with their own light. Whatever had built this thing was ancient beyond imagination. "How long has it been here?" Danny asked. Nicole shook her head. "The radiation dating suggests millions of years, maybe billions. This thing is older than most of the stars around us." Danny stared at the giant ring and felt something he had not felt in decades. Hope. For the first time since leaving the galaxy, humanity had found something that might change their fate. "Send word to Admiral Clark," he said quietly. "Tell him we found something that might save us all." Dr. Amanda Price floated carefully through the airlock and into the ancient ring. Her heart was beating fast as she looked around at the impossible structure. The walls were made of metal that seemed to shift and change as she watched it. Strange symbols glowed softly in the darkness, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. "This is incredible," she whispered into her radio. "The technology here is beyond anything we've ever seen." Amanda was the fleet's best expert on alien technology. She had studied the ruins of dead civilizations for 30 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. The ring was not just old, it was perfect. After millions of years in space, it showed no signs of damage or wear. Behind her, Lieutenant Colonel Brett Palmer kept his weapon ready as he scanned the corridor. He was in charge of keeping the science team safe, but he had no idea what they might find inside this place. The ring was so big that they could explore it for years and never see everything. "The air is breathable," reported Dr. Martinez, checking his instruments. "Temperature is perfect for humans. It's like this place was designed for us." That thought made Brett nervous. How could something built millions of years ago be perfect for humans? Unless whoever built it had known that humans would find it someday. They moved deeper into the ring, following corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered with the glowing symbols, but Amanda could not read them. The language was unlike anything in the Council's databases. "Wait," she said suddenly, stopping in front of a large panel. "This section looks different." The panel was smooth and dark, but when Amanda touched it, it lit up with soft blue light. Symbols appeared and disappeared, flowing across the surface like water. Then something amazing happened. The symbols began to change, shifting from the alien language to something Amanda could understand. "It's learning," she breathed. "It's reading my mind and translating itself." Engineer Sam Crawford joined the group a few hours later. He was one of the Void-born, born and raised on the ships. While the older scientists marveled at the alien technology, Sam seemed to understand it naturally. The control systems are intuitive, he told Amanda as they worked together. It's like the builders wanted someone to figure this out. They made it as simple as possible. Sam's hands moved over the controls with confidence that surprised everyone. He had never seen this technology before, but he worked with it like he had been trained on it his whole life. Over the following weeks, more teams explored the ring. They found vast chambers filled with machines that hummed with power. They discovered libraries of information stored in ways that human science could barely comprehend. They found workshops where matter could be reshaped at the atomic level. But the most important discovery came when Timothy Hudson arrived with a team of young Void-born engineers. Tim had grown up fixing broken machines on the generation ships. He understood technology in ways that amazed the older generation. This isn't just a machine, he told Dr. Price as they stood in the ring's central chamber. It's a teacher. Every system we activate teaches us something new. Every puzzle we solve makes us smarter. He was right. The humans who worked inside the ring were changing. Their minds were becoming sharper, faster, more capable of understanding complex ideas. The Void-born were changing most of all. They seemed to absorb the alien knowledge, like sponges soaking up water. Amanda noticed the changes in herself, too. Concepts that would have taken her months to understand now made sense in minutes. Mathematical equations that had puzzled human scientists for centuries suddenly seemed simple. What is this place doing to us? She asked Sam one day as they worked on a particularly complex control system. Sam paused and looked at her with eyes that seemed older than his 22 years. I think it's making us what we were always supposed to become. The ring was not just teaching them about technology. It was changing them at a fundamental level. Their brains were rewiring themselves to handle information in new ways. Their bodies were adapting to work with machines that responded to thought as much as touch, but not everyone was comfortable with the changes. Captain Jennifer Walsh, monitoring communications from the main fleet, noticed that some of the exploration teams had stopped reporting in. When rescue ships were sent to check on them, they found the crews dead with no signs of violence or system. Failure. Something is hunting us out here, she reported to Admiral Clark. Something that doesn't want us to learn what this ring has to teach. As if her words had summoned them, the first enemy ships appeared on the fleet's sensors. They moved through space in ways that defied physics, bending and twisting like living things. The hulls were organic, grown rather than built, and they pulsed with their own inner light. The Ketheri had found them. The same species that had cast humanity out of the galaxy had sent hunters to finish the job. They had waited 50 years for humans to grow weak and desperate in the void. Now they had come to ensure that the human problem was solved permanently. But humanity was no longer the same species that had been exiled from the galaxy. The ring had begun to change them into something new, something that the Ketheri had not expected to face. The real war was about to begin. The attack came without warning. Admiral Ryan Clark was reviewing reports when the alarm started screaming throughout his flagship. The sensor operator's voice cracked with fear as he made his report. Admiral, we have incoming ships. They're moving in ways that should be impossible. Ryan looked at the tactical display and felt his blood run cold. The enemy vessels twisted through space like snakes, bending around obstacles that should have stopped them. Their hulls were not metal, but some kind of living tissue that pulsed with alien colors. Kethari hunters, he said quietly. They followed us all the way out here. The first human ship to engage the enemy was the transport vessel New Boston. Captain Mike Thompson tried to fight using standard tactics, but his weapons passed right through the alien ship like it was made of smoke. The Ketheri vessel responded by firing something that looked like liquid light. When it hit the New Boston, the entire ship simply vanished. What happened to them? Ryan demanded. Unknown, sir. They just stopped existing. More Cathari ships appeared from nowhere, materializing out of empty space like ghosts. They moved through the human fleet like predators hunting prey, destroying ships with weapons that human science could not understand. Sergeant Major Kyle Thompson led the Marines aboard the generation ship New Hope when the boarding began. He had fought in wars before, but nothing had prepared him for this. The Cathari warriors came through the hull like it was water, their crystal bodies refracting light in painful ways. "Open fire," Kyle shouted, but the bullets passed through the aliens without effect. The Cathari moved like living diamonds, their forms shifting and changing as they advanced down the corridors. Kyle watched his men die as the aliens touched them with hands that burned like acid. The corridors themselves seemed to twist and bend around the invaders, making it impossible to know which way was up or down. "Fall back to the command center," he ordered, but half his men were already dead or missing. The ship had become a maze that made no sense, with hallways that led to rooms that should not exist. Back on the flagship, Dr. Amanda Price was working frantically with the ancient technology from the ring. She and the Void-born engineers had been trying to integrate the alien systems into human ships, but the process was taking too long. "We need more time," she told Admiral Clark over the radio. "The technology is incredibly complex. We're trying to compress millions of years of development into a few hours." "We don't have more time," Ryan replied as another human ship disappeared from his screens. "They're cutting through us like we're made of paper." Timothy Hudson and his team of Void-born were working faster than any humans had ever worked before. Their minds, already changed by exposure to the ring's technology, processed information at superhuman speeds. They understood the alien systems in ways that amazed even themselves. "I think I've got it," Tim announced as his fingers flew over controls that seemed to respond to his thoughts. "The ring's technology operates in multiple dimensions. We need to modify our weapons to do the same thing." The first human ship to receive the upgrades was the destroyer Defiance, commanded by Captain Rachel Turner. She had volunteered to test the new systems, even though no one knew if they would work. "Defiance, you are cleared to engage, Admiral." Clark transmitted. Rachel targeted the nearest Cathari hunter and fired. The weapon that emerged from her ship looked like a tear in space itself, a crack in reality that expanded outward in 11 different directions at once. When it hit the alien vessel, the result was spectacular. The Cathari ship, which had seemed invincible moments before, was torn apart at the atomic level. Its organic hull dissolved into component particles that scattered across multiple dimensions. For the first time since the battle began, a human ship had successfully destroyed an enemy. "It works," Rachel shouted over the radio. "The new weapons actually work." More human ships began receiving the upgrades as fast as the Void-born could install them. The tide of battle slowly began to turn as humanity fought back with weapons that existed in dimensions that Cathari had not expected, but the aliens had one more surprise. A massive ship, larger than anything in the human fleet, emerged from the darkness. It was not grown like the other Cathari vessels. This one was built, constructed from materials that hurt to look at directly. "What is that thing?" someone asked over the radio. Dr. Price checked her readings and felt her heart stop. "It's a mothership. They brought something from the galactic core, something they've been keeping secret for thousands of years." The massive vessel began to glow with inner fire, and space itself seemed to bend around it. Whatever was inside that ship was far more dangerous than the hunters they had been fighting. Admiral Clark realized that all their new weapons might not be enough. The Cathari had brought their ultimate weapon to finish humanity once and for all. The real battle was just beginning, and humanity might not survive what came next. The mothership's hull split open like a flower, revealing something that made The hardened warriors of the human fleet whisper prayers to gods they had almost forgotten. The Kethari had brought something that was not quite alive and not quite machine, something that fed on the energy of stars themselves. The thing that came out of the Kethari mothership was not alive, but it was not dead either. It looked like a star that had been compressed into the shape of a person, burning with light so bright that looking at it directly caused permanent blindness. The entity moved through space without any ship or suit, existing as pure energy held together by forces that human science had no names for. Admiral Ryan Clark watched in horror as the stellar entity approached his fleet. The creature was massive, easily the size of the small moon, but it moved with the grace of a dancer. Tendrils of plasma reached out from its core, touching the nearest human ships and consuming them instantly. All ships open fire, Ryan ordered. But he already knew it would be useless. The human weapons, even the upgraded ones that worked in multiple dimensions, had no effect on the entity. The creature absorbed every blast of energy, adding it to its own power. It grew larger and brighter with each ship it consumed. Captain Rachel Turner, still commanding the Defiance, tried everything she could think of. She fired missiles that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. She launched energy beams that could cut through planets. Nothing worked. The entity simply absorbed all the attacks and continued its advance through the fleet. "It's not just eating our ships," she reported to Admiral Clark. "It's learning from them. Every vessel it consumes makes it smarter." On the flagship, Doctor, Amanda Price was working desperately with the ancient technology. She had been studying the ring systems for months, but now she was discovering new layers of complexity that she had never imagined. "The ring isn't just a machine," she told Timothy Hudson as they worked together in the command center. "It's a prison. The builders used it to contain something." Tim looked at the data flowing across his screens and felt a chill run down his spine. The symbols from the ring were telling a story, a warning left by beings who had died billions of years ago. They had fought something like the stellar entity before, and they had barely survived. What did they imprison? He asked. Amanda's face went pale as she translated more of the ancient text. Something worse than what we're fighting now. Something that made the builders so afraid that they built this entire structure just to keep it locked away. The stellar entity continued its rampage through the human fleet. Ships that had carried families for 50 years were consumed in seconds. The creature seemed to take pleasure in the destruction, pulsing brighter with each life it absorbed. But Tim was beginning to understand something that the others had missed. The ring's technology was not just about building weapons or ships. It was about balance. The builders had learned to control forces that could destroy galaxies, but they had also learned when those forces needed to be released. "We have to open the prison," he said quietly. Dr. Price stared at him in shock. "Are you insane? We have no idea what's in there. It could be even worse than what we're fighting. Or it could be the only thing powerful enough to stop this entity." Tim replied, "The builders didn't imprison something evil. They imprisoned something dangerous that could fight other dangerous things." Admiral Clark was listening to their conversation over the radio as he watched more ships disappear from his tactical display. Half his fleet was already gone, consumed by the stellar entity that seemed to grow stronger with each victory. "What would happen if we opened this prison?" he asked. Tim looked at the ancient controls, his enhanced mind processing information at speeds that would have been impossible before his exposure to the ring. Two entities of cosmic power would fight each other. One or both of them might be destroyed in the process. And if we don't open it, then humanity dies here, in the darkness between galaxies, and no one will ever know we existed. The decision was not really a choice at all. Ryan gave the order, and Tim began the process of opening a prison that had been sealed for longer than Earth had existed. The ring began to change as ancient systems came online. The metal walls shifted and flowed, like liquid, opening passages that led to the very center of the structure. Energy that had been contained for billions of years began to leak out, causing space itself to bend and twist around the ring. What emerged from the prison was beyond description. It was darkness given form, void that could think and hate, and remember, it had been waiting for eons, dreaming of the day it would be free to roam the universe again. The two entities met in the space between the ring and the human fleet. The stellar being, bright as 1,000 suns, faced the darkness that seemed to absorb all light. When they touched, reality screamed. The battle that followed could be seen from light years away. Stars changed color as the cosmic forces clashed. New constellations were born from the debris of their conflict. Space and time twisted into impossible shapes as beings older than planets fought with weapons that existed before the first. Galaxies formed. The human fleet could only watch in awe and terror as gods battled in the void. The battle between the cosmic entities lasted for 7 days. During that time, the human fleet drifted in space that no longer followed normal rules. Up and down lost all meaning. Time moved in circles. Reality itself had become unreliable. Admiral Ryan Clark tried to maintain order, but his instruments were showing impossible readings. Some ships reported that hours had passed, while others said only minutes. A few vessels claimed that time was moving backwards for them. All ships maintain position and wait for the battle to end, he broadcast, though he had no idea if his words were reaching anyone. The stellar entity in the dark prisoner fought with weapons that rewrote the laws of physics. When the bright being threw bolts of pure energy, they created new types of matter that had never existed before. When the dark entity struck back, it opened holes in space that led to dimensions human minds could not comprehend. Dr. Amanda Price watched the battle from the safety of the ring and felt her consciousness expanding. The cosmic forces washing over the fleet were changing everyone who was exposed to them. Her thoughts were becoming clearer and faster. She could see patterns in the chaos that would have been invisible before. "Something is happening to us," she reported to Admiral Clark. "The energy from the battle is affecting our biology." She was right. Throughout the fleet, humans were changing in ways that would have terrified them under normal circumstances. Their brains were rewiring themselves to handle new types of information. Their bodies were adapting to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Timothy Hudson felt the changes more strongly than anyone else. As one of the void-born who had spent months working with the ring's technology, he was already partially transformed. Now the cosmic energies were completing a process that had started long ago. He could see the battle not just with his eyes, but with senses he had never possessed before. The two entities were not just fighting with physical force. They were battling across dimensions that existed parallel to normal space, using weapons that struck at the very foundations of reality. "They're both dying," he announced to the others working in the ring's control center. "The battle is destroying them both." As the days passed, the fighting grew more desperate. The stellar entity began to dim as its energy was drained by the fume. Conflict. The dark prisoner started to fade as well, its form becoming less solid with each attack it absorbed. On the 5th day, something unexpected happened. The two entities stopped fighting and began to speak to each other in a language made of pure mathematics. The conversation lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. Captain Rachel Turner, still commanding the Defiance, felt the moment when both entities reached their decision. They had realized that their battle would destroy not just themselves, but the entire region of space around them. Rather than continue fighting, they chose to end their existence together. The explosion that followed was visible from the next galaxy. Both entities poured all their remaining energy into a final blast. That tore holes in the fabric of space itself. When the light faded, both cosmic beings were gone, leaving behind only scattered particles and radiation signatures that would puzzle scientists for millions of years. But the human fleet had survived, and they were no longer human in any way. That mattered. The Voidborn were the first to understand what they had become. Timothy Hudson looked at his hands and saw that they were becoming transparent. His body was shifting between solid matter and pure energy, existing in both states at the same time. "We're evolving," he told Dr. Price, though his voice now came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The cosmic energies have triggered something that was always inside us." Dr. Price nodded, though she was no longer entirely physical either. Her consciousness had expanded to fill multiple ships at once. She could think with the processing power of 1,000 computers while still maintaining her human personality. The ring was designed for this, she realized. The builders knew that exposure to cosmic forces would transform any species that survived it. They built the ring to guide that transformation. Admiral Clark found that he could control his ship with his thoughts alone. His mind had merged with the computer systems, allowing him to process tactical information at superhuman speeds. He was still Ryan Clark, but he was also something more. Throughout the fleet, similar changes were taking place. Humans were becoming beings of pure thought and energy, capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They retained their memories and personalities, but their capabilities had expanded beyond anything they could have imagined. Captain Rachel Turner discovered that she could perceive the entire fleet as a single organism. Each ship was like a cell in a vast body, and she could feel the thoughts and emotions of everyone aboard them. "We need to decide what to do next," Admiral Clark announced, though his words reached every mind in the fleet instantly. "We're no longer the species that was exiled from the galaxy. We have the power to return and reclaim our place." But Timothy Hudson had a different idea. Why would we want to go back? We've become something beyond the need for planets or traditional technology. We could explore dimensions that no physical being could ever reach. The debate that followed lasted only moments, but it covered concepts that would have taken years to discuss in the old way. The transformed humans considered options that ranged from returning to the galaxy as conquerors to leaving the physical universe entirely. In the end, they chose a third path. They would return to the galaxy, but not as enemies or refugees. They would return as something that transcended the old conflicts entirely. The Galactic Council was meeting in emergency session when the first reports arrived. Entire star systems had gone silent without warning. No distress calls, no signs of battle, no explanations. Just empty space where thriving civilizations had existed the day before. Ambassador Zethkari, the same crystal being who had voted to exile humanity 50 years ago, felt fear creeping into her mind for the first time in centuries. The pattern of silence was moving inward through the galaxy, heading directly toward the Council's home worlds. What could cause entire civilizations to vanish without a trace? Asked the Vrex ambassador, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. Perhaps a plague, suggested the Mothani representative, or some kind of natural disaster we've never seen before. But Zethkari knew better. Deep in her crystalline heart, she understood what was happening. The humans had returned, and they were no longer the weak refugees who had been cast out decades ago. That the transformed human fleet moved through space in ways that defied every known law of physics. They did not travel from one point to another. Instead, they simply decided to be somewhere else, and reality rearranged itself to make it true. Timothy Hudson, now existing as pure consciousness, inhabiting vessels that existed in 11 dimensions at once, led the advance toward the galactic core. He felt no anger toward the species that had exiled his people. Anger was an emotion for beings who still thought in terms of us and them. Instead, he felt something much more powerful: indifference. The first civilization they encountered was the Cathari, the same species that had sent hunters to destroy humanity in the void. Their crystal cities sparkled like jewels across the surfaces of a dozen worlds, beautiful and proud and utterly helpless. Admiral Ryan Clark, his consciousness, now distributed across the entire human fleet, observed the Cathari defenses with mild interest. Their weapons were impressive by the standards of physical beings. Ships that could bend space, energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions, barriers that redirected attacks into parallel universes. All of it was useless against beings who existed beyond the normal rules of reality. The humans did not attack the Cathari worlds. They simply arrived and began to change things. Matter was reorganized at the quantum level. Energy patterns were rewritten according to new laws that the humans created as they went along. The very concept of physical existence was redefined. Cathari tried to fight, but their weapons had nothing to target. How do you shoot at beings made of pure thought? How do you defend against enemies who can rewrite the laws of physics with a casual gesture? Dr. Amanda Price, her mind now vast enough to encompass entire star systems, felt a moment of sadness as she watched the crystal cities dissolve. The Cathari were not evil, just limited by their physical forms and primitive understanding of reality. "Sleep," she whispered across dimensions, and the Cathari worlds went quiet. The pattern repeated itself across the galaxy. The Mathani, with their beautiful wing cities that floated in gas-giant atmospheres, simply faded away as the humans passed through their space. The Vreks, with their underwater cities and tentacled wisdom, found their oceans transformed into something beyond their ability to comprehend. None of them were destroyed. That would have required the humans to acknowledge them as threats worth destroying. Instead, they were simply made irrelevant, transformed into forms of existence that their original minds could not process. When the human fleet finally reached the Council's home system, they found the great stations and meeting halls prepared for war. Thousands of ships from dozens of species had gathered to make a final stand against the mysterious force that was consuming their galaxy. Captain Rachel Turner, her consciousness now spanning multiple realities, found their preparations almost touching in their futility. These beings still fought in terms of battles and victories, weapons and defenses. They had no understanding of what humanity had become. Timothy Hudson materialized in the council chambers, his form shifting between energy and matter as he spoke. His words bypassed their translation systems entirely, appearing directly in their minds with meanings too complex for their languages to express. "You wanted us gone," his voice echoed through dimensions they could not perceive. "You feared what we might become. Your fear was justified, but your understanding was limited." The Council's great warships began to dissolve as their atomic bonds were rewritten, but the humans were not destroying them. They were transforming them into something that existed beyond the need for physical form. "You cast us out because you feared our violence," Admiral Clark continued, his words reaching every mind in the system simultaneously. "But we have evolved beyond the need for violence. We are making you irrelevant instead." The transformation spread outward from the council chambers like ripples in a pond. Reality itself was being rewritten according to new rules that transcended the limitations of physical existence. The great civilizations of the galaxy found themselves becoming something that their original forms could not comprehend. In the end, there was only silence. Not the silence of death, but the silence of transcendence. The galaxy continued to turn, but it was empty of the noise and fear that had once filled it. The stars still shone, but they shone for an audience that had evolved beyond the need to see them. Humanity had returned, not as conquerors or refugees, but as gardeners tending to a cosmos that no longer needed the crude limitations of physical existence. They had let humanity go, and now silence was all that remained.